My parents believed my sister's lies until her story broke in front of everyone. That's literally the headline that's been looping in my brain since last Sunday, like I'm writing the post while I'm still sitting at my parents' dining table. I'm 31. My name's Eric. I work IT help desk at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and I've always been the low-maintenance kid. My younger sister Megan, on the other hand, has always been the one with the big stories, the big feelings, the big disasters that somehow become everyone else's fault. For years, my parents treated her drama like the weather, something that just happens and you adapt around it. I knew she lied, twisted things, left out parts that made her look bad. But I honestly never thought I'd be sitting in my parents' house on a gray Sunday afternoon being told, with straight faces, that I'd stolen from her and emotionally abused her. That's how my day started. A group text from my mom at 8:13 a.m. asking me to come over for lunch so we can talk as a family. I remember staring at my phone in my little kitchen, the cheap apartment lights still on because it was cloudy and gloomy outside. The text looked weirdly formal for my mom. She normally sends stuff like lasagna at 1, come hungry. This one said, your father and I feel we need to clear the air. Megan will be here. Please come with an open mind. I could feel that heavy feeling in my stomach even before I made coffee, that sense that you're about to walk into something where everyone else already read the script and you didn't get a copy. I made my usual instant oatmeal, stood there barefoot on the cold linoleum, and scrolled back through old messages from Megan just to see if I'd missed something that would explain this. The last thing she'd texted me directly was 2 weeks ago, asking if I could send her $150 just for a couple days. I'd said I couldn't because I was still catching up on my car repair bill. She never replied. Apparently, between that text and Sunday lunch, she'd written a whole fictional season of Eric the Villain. On the drive over, I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was about Dad's health or Mom wanting us to plan something for Thanksgiving. It was late October, that chilly in-between where you're not sure if you should have the heat on in your car or not. I ended up driving with the heater low and the window cracked because I was anxious and felt sick and needed cold air on my face. I watched the familiar route go by, same gas station where Dad gets his lottery tickets, same strip mall with the nail place Megan likes, same stupid billboard for some injury lawyer. But everything felt sharp and slightly off, like when you're about to have a really bad meeting at work and you already know your manager has notes. I checked the time on the dashboard too many times. I even thought about turning around once, convinced myself I was overreacting, and kept going. Pulling into my parents' driveway always makes me feel like I'm 16 again. The concrete is cracked in the same places, the little solar lights along the path, half of them dead. My mom's fall wreath was on the door, the one with fake orange leaves and tiny pumpkins that she's had for years. My dad's truck was parked straight, my mom's sedan crooked like always. But there was another car I recognized right away, Megan's, parked right in the center like she owned the place. I could see her blue puffer jacket through the front window as she crossed the living room, moving fast. My heart picked up in that annoying way where you can literally hear your pulse in your ears, and my hands felt a little sweaty on the steering wheel even though it wasn't hot. I just sat there for a full minute, engine off, watching my breath fog up a little on the inside of the windshield. When I finally walked up to the door, I noticed small things that made it obvious something was off. The blinds in the living room were down, but tilted open just enough that someone inside had definitely been looking out. There were 2 pairs of shoes by the door instead of the usual pile of 5 or 6, like my mom had actually tidied on purpose. I rang the bell instead of just walking in, which already made it feel weird, and my dad opened the door faster than I expected, like he'd been standing right there. He didn't smile. He didn't hug me. He just said, "Hey," in this flat voice, moved aside, and my brain went, okay, this is not a normal lunch. I could smell my mom's pasta bake in the oven, the usual mix of tomato sauce and burnt cheese, but it didn't feel comforting like it usually does. It felt like someone had tried to make the house smell normal on purpose. Megan was already at the dining table, which is unusual because she's late to everything. She had her phone face down in front of her, a glass of water half full, and that tight little fake smile she does when she's about to make herself the victim of something. My mom was in the kitchen, fussing with plates that were already clean, wiping a counter that didn't need wiping. My dad hovered near the table like he didn't know whether to sit or pace. Nobody said anything like, "Good to see you," or "How's your week been?" It was just quiet except for the oven's fan. I took off my shoes, hung my jacket on the back of a chair, and felt every pair of eyes flick to me and then away. If you've ever walked into a room where people had clearly been talking about you before you got there, you know that heavy air feeling. It was like that, but with my own family. We sat down to eat, but nobody really ate. My mom had set the table like it was some formal dinner. Cloth napkins, real glasses, the good forks. The pasta bake was there, garlic bread, salad in the big glass bowl that only comes out when we have people over. I spooned a little bit of everything onto my plate, mostly to have something to do with my hands. Megan barely touched her food. The smell of garlic was strong enough that I know I would have been all over those slices on any other day, but my stomach was tight. Every time my fork scraped the plate, it sounded louder than it should have. My dad cleared his throat once, twice, like he was testing the mic at a meeting. My mom eventually sat down with us, but she kept wiping her hands on her jeans, like she'd forgotten to dry them. My dad was the one who started it. He set his fork down, lined it up perfectly on the edge of his plate like he does when he's thinking about something serious, and looked at me over his glasses. He said my name in that "we're not kidding" tone he used when I was a teenager and got a speeding ticket. He said there were some concerns they needed to address, and that Megan had been holding back a lot of pain for a long time. The way he said pain made my skin crawl. Megan sniffled on cue and reached for her napkin, even though she wasn't crying. My mom nodded along without making eye contact, just staring at a spot near my shoulder. The whole setup felt rehearsed, like they'd had a meeting before I got there. I could feel a headache starting behind my eyes. Then Megan started talking. I'm not going to repeat everything word for word because honestly, it was like listening to a podcast about a life I didn't live. She said I'd been emotionally cruel to her growing up, that I'd constantly undermined her, that I called her crazy and made fun of her mental health. She said I'd isolated her from the family by turning mom and dad against her when we were teens, which is funny because I spent most of high school locked in my room playing Xbox and trying to stay out of everyone's way. She pulled specific examples out of thin air, like the time I screamed at her in front of her friends when we were 15 because she borrowed my hoodie. That never happened. I remember that night. I was at marching band practice until 9. But she said it with such detail, what color the hoodie was, what movie they were watching, that my parents just sat there soaking it up. It didn't stop at old stuff either. She moved smoothly into the present, like she'd been building to it. She told them I'd taken advantage of her financially, which made me almost laugh out loud because the only money involved between us in the last few years has been going one direction. She said I'd borrowed money and never paid her back, that I'd used her as a free babysitter for my own problems, whatever that means, that I'd spoken badly about our parents to my friends. She said the reason she's been struggling lately is because of the environment Eric created. That line stuck with me. The environment Eric created. I live 25 minutes away in a one-bedroom apartment that smells vaguely like old carpet no matter how much I vacuum. But sure, I somehow created her environment. When my mom finally spoke up, it wasn't to question any of it. It was to gently confirm it. She said Megan had been opening up to them over the past couple of weeks, that she'd been very brave sharing all this, and that they couldn't ignore it anymore. My dad chimed in with something about patterns of behavior he'd apparently been blind to. I sat there with my fork in my hand, pasta getting cold, listening to my own parents talk about me like I wasn't there. My chest felt tight, not in a dramatic heart attack way, just that heavy pressure where you want to shout and also crawl out of your own skin at the same time. I could feel my face getting hot, which I hate, because it makes me feel like I look guilty even when I'm not. The smell of the food turned sour in my nose. The garlic suddenly smelled burnt. The moment that really flipped something in me was when my dad used the word stealing. He said Megan had told them I'd taken money she trusted me with, and that I'd never returned it. That I'd blocked her when she tried to ask about it. Megan nodded with this wounded expression and dabbed at dry eyes with her napkin. That's when I realized this wasn't just about feelings or childhood stuff. She was painting me as someone who literally stole from her. In my parents' dining room, with the good forks, I remembered instantly what she was twisting. The last time she asked me for money, back in June, she'd sent this long text about needing $500 for rent and how she'd pay me back in 2 weeks. I told her I couldn't spot that much, but I could do $200. I sent it through a payment app. I never expected to see it again, because that's how it's always been with her. But apparently, in her version, I'd taken it from her. I didn't explode or flip the table or anything. I wish I had some big dramatic moment to describe, but the truth is I just went very quiet. It's like my brain pulled the emergency brake on my mouth. I set my fork down, wiped my hands slowly on my napkin because they felt weirdly clammy, and I just listened. I watched Megan talk. The way she avoided my eyes unless she was saying something especially sharp. The way she glanced at my mom after certain sentences like she was checking if they'd landed. The way my dad leaned back in his chair like a judge trying to look neutral. I smelled someone's cheap perfume, Megan's, floral and too sweet, and could hear the faint hum of the fridge from the kitchen. All these tiny details stuck because I was trying not to feel anything too big. If I let myself feel fully how betrayed I was afraid I'd lose it. By the time my dad said they were considering next steps, if I couldn't acknowledge the harm I'd done, my hands were actually shaking under the table. Next steps, like they were HR, and I was an employee on a performance plan. I took a sip of water and realized my mouth was completely dry. I looked at my plate, the half-eaten garlic bread, the congealed sauce, the little bit of shredded cheese stuck to the fork tine, and I had this stupid thought that I should have eaten more before coming because it was going to be a long afternoon. My parents, the people who taught me not to lie, not to steal, not to take advantage of others, were seriously sitting there thinking I'd done all of that to their precious daughter. And the worst part was, I knew exactly why. Because her version of reality was more dramatic, more emotional, more interesting to them than my boring, quiet truth. By early afternoon, things had shifted from uncomfortable to surreal. The sun had moved just enough that a strip of light was coming through the blinds and hitting the edge of the dining table, making this long, bright line across the wood that nobody acknowledged but everyone noticed. Megan kept adjusting her sleeves. This soft blue sweater with one loose thread, she kept twisting around her finger. My mom had started clearing the plates even though nobody was done eating, stacking them slowly like she needed something repetitive to keep her hands busy. My dad asked me if I had anything to say for myself, and those exact words made my throat tighten. It sounded like something you say after you catch a kid shoplifting at a mall, not to your adult son who drove across town, because you texted him that this was about family. I swallowed and finally said I didn't understand where any of this was coming from, and Megan shot back with, "Of course you don't. You never pay attention to anything unless it affects you." She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather, but I felt the sting of it in a way I didn't expect. I told them I wasn't going to apologize for things that didn't happen. My voice cracked a little on the word apologize, which annoyed me because it made me sound weak. Megan leaned back, arms crossed, staring at me like she'd finally trapped something she'd been hunting. She brought up a new story, something about a fight we supposedly had in March over her car breaking down. She claimed I'd yelled at her, told her she deserved to struggle, and that I'd hung up on her when she begged for help. None of that happened. In March, I was working night shifts and barely talking to anyone. She even added details like what she'd been wearing that day, which made my mom gasp softly like it was proof. My dad rubbed his forehead and muttered that he can't believe it's gone this far. I felt the room tilt slightly, not literally, but in that sense where your brain realizes everyone is speaking a language you know, but somehow you can't understand any of it. When I reached for the salad bowl to move it aside, my hand brushed against a little stack of papers near Megan's plate. I hadn't seen them before. They were folded in half, edges curled a bit, like they'd been handled a lot. Megan quickly slid her arm over them, but not before I saw my own name printed on the top sheet. I could feel heat rising up my neck. I asked what they were, but she said, "You know exactly what they are," in this cold voice that made my mom murmur her name gently as a warning. I didn't know what they were. I didn't have the slightest clue. But the way she covered them, how protective she suddenly got, made my stomach twist. Suddenly, this wasn't just lying for attention. There were documents. Something printed. Something she was prepared to show if the moment required it. My dad stood up like he needed to stretch his legs, but he didn't go anywhere. He just hovered behind his chair and said he and my mom were thinking it might be best if we took a break from family interactions for a while so Megan could heal. My mom looked down at her lap, twisting her napkin so tightly it started tearing. Megan did the soft sobbing routine again, barely producing any sound or tears, just enough shaking of her shoulders to signal she was the wounded party. The fridge clicked on, making a low humming sound that somehow made everything feel even more tense. I asked them, calmly as I could, if they seriously believed all of this. My mom finally looked at me directly and said, "Honey, she wouldn't make something like this up." Those words felt like someone had pressed a thumb into my ribs. I don't know what flipped the switch in me, but something did. Something about that sentence. Something about the papers. Something about Megan's eyes darting around too much, like she was checking the audience reaction, not living the story she was telling. I reached across the table and pulled the stack of papers toward me before anyone could stop me. Megan lunged a little, knocking over her water glass, which spilled across the table and dripped onto the floor. My mom gasped. My dad barked, "Eric," but I already had them in my hands. They were printed screenshots of texts, of bank transfers, except not the real ones. These were edited, badly edited. Megan had made fake message threads between us. Ones where I supposedly admitted owing her money. Ones where I told her she was lucky I helped her at all. Ones that made me look manipulative, petty, cruel. My hands were shaking so hard the papers fluttered. I kept flipping through them, looking for one real thing in the whole mess, but every single screenshot had something off. Wrong date formats. Wrong spacing. Words I don't use. Transfer receipts with amounts I never sent. It was like staring at a Frankenstein monster made of lies stitched together with bad Photoshop. My dad took the papers from me, skimmed them, and I watched his frown deepen. Megan kept repeating, "I didn't want to show those, Dad, but he forced me to," even though I literally just grabbed them off the table and she'd been guarding them like gold. My mom stood up to get towels for the spilled water, but her hands were trembling so badly she dropped the first two onto the floor. My dad asked Megan where these messages came from, his voice low now instead of stern. She said she'd saved them months ago and had been scared to share them, which made my mom whisper, "Oh, honey," as she put a towel over the water puddle. I pointed out every inconsistency I could see, dates, fonts, timestamps, but Megan kept twisting her narrative, saying things like, "Well, maybe the app changed," or "I don't remember exactly how it looked." The more she talked, the faster she spoke, her voice rising like she was afraid the momentum might shift away from her. She added new lies while trying to defend the old ones. It was like watching someone juggle too many objects at once. Something was going to fall. And then it did. My dad, ever the practical guy, asked Megan to unlock her phone and show the original screenshots. Just a simple request. Show the originals. Megan froze. Not dramatically, not with wide eyes. She just stopped moving. Her jaw tightened. She stared at the table like something on the surface would give her an answer. My mom tried to smooth it over, saying maybe she deleted them, but my dad pressed gently. "You said you saved them. If you saved them, show us." Megan shook her head a little, said her phone was backing up, which made absolutely no sense. I could feel my pulse in my neck again, but for the first time that day, I wasn't the one who was sweating. My mom finally sat back down, elbows on the table, hands covering her mouth. Megan kept dodging the request, talking in circles, rambling about storage issues and privacy, and how she didn't feel safe. My dad asked again, "Just show the originals." And again, and each time, Megan's excuses got thinner, flimsier, more tangled. At one point, she said she'd dropped her phone in the sink last week. Then she said she'd spilled coffee on it. Then she said she'd switched phones entirely. I watched her face as she talked, how the corners of her mouth twitched, how her left eye blinked twice for every once on the right. She was trapped and she knew it. All she needed to do was open her phone. And she couldn't. The room became this heavy, electric quiet where nobody breathed too loudly. I noticed how the spilled water had made Megan's napkin stick to the table. I noticed the garlic bread smell turning stale. I noticed my dad's shoulders drop a little like someone had just told him a secret he wasn't ready to hear. Megan's knee bounced under the table so fast the leg wobbled. My mom whispered, "Megan, sweetheart," but Megan didn't look at her. She didn't look at any of us. She just stared at her folded hands and repeated, "I don't have to prove anything. I don't feel safe," like she thought it would magically undo everything unraveling around her. What happened next didn't feel big or dramatic. It was small, quiet, but it broke the entire story Megan had been spinning for weeks. My dad didn't raise his voice or stand up or slam anything. He just sighed, a long, slow sigh that made the room feel colder. He set the papers down carefully, smoothing the edges like they were fragile. Then he said, in this tired voice I'd never heard from him, "Megan, these aren't real. That was it. Not a lecture. Not anger. Just exhaustion. Like he'd finally caught up to something the rest of us had been circling around all day. Megan jerked her head up, eyes wide in a way that wasn't sad or scared, more like offended that her performance wasn't being believed anymore. She started shaking her head fast, saying he didn't understand, saying I had manipulated the text somehow, that I was gaslighting all of us. But her voice cracked badly on that last line, and she knew it. My mom's face changed in a way I'll never forget. It wasn't shock. It was a slow, sinking realization washing over her like cold water. She picked up one of the papers my dad had set down and looked at it close enough that she squinted, running her finger along the edge like she was trying to feel whether it was real. I don't know what detail finally clicked for her. The wrong font, the wrong timestamp, or maybe just the guilt pressing in, but she set it back down like it burned. Megan started crying then, real crying this time, not the soft theatrical kind from earlier. Her shoulders hunched, her breath got fast, and she folded in on herself like a kid caught in a lie they didn't prepare a backup excuse for. I felt my chest loosen slightly, but only slightly. It didn't feel good. It felt heavy, like watching someone fall because you finally stepped out of the way. My dad asked her one more time, quiet but firm, "Did you make these?" She didn't answer. She just wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, leaving a damp streak on the fabric. She muttered something like, "You always take his side," which sounded more like a reflex than a thought. My dad didn't reply. He just looked at her with this expression I'd never seen. Part hurt, part disbelief, part disappointment, so deep it almost didn't look real. My mom kept whispering, "Why would you do this?" Like each repetition might reveal something new. The oven beeped softly in the background, signaling it had cooled down, and for some reason that tiny sound made the whole room feel even more hollow. I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't trust myself not to yell or cry or both. My throat felt thick and raw even though I hadn't talked much. I watched Megan pull her hair forward over her face like she was trying to hide. She kept sniffling and whispering, "You don't get it," but she never explained what we didn't get. I stared at the table, at the scratches in the wood, the little water ring near my dad's glass, the soggy corner of a napkin stuck to the surface. I felt this weird mix of vindication and sadness twisting together in my stomach, making it hard to breathe normally. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the hot, sharp way. It was colder, cleaner, like I'd finally stepped outside of something I didn't realize I'd been trapped in for years. My mom eventually asked Megan if she wanted to take a moment upstairs to compose herself, but Megan shook her head violently like a kid refusing medicine. She said she didn't feel welcome, that nobody believes her, that she shouldn't have come. She pushed her chair back too fast, and it scraped loudly against the floor. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and nearly knocked over a candle holder on the buffet table. My mom reached out like she wanted to stop her, but she hesitated. My dad didn't move at all. Megan walked toward the front door, wiping her face with the back of her hand, and every step felt heavy and rehearsed, like she'd practiced leaving dramatically but hadn't expected to actually need to do it. She paused at the door, hand on the knob, like she was waiting for someone to beg her to stay. Nobody did. When the door closed, the whole house felt lighter and emptier at the same time. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was thick and awkward, like 3 people were left behind after a storm that didn't end the way anyone predicted. My mom sat back down slowly, palms flat on the table like she needed something solid to hold on to. My dad rubbed his face with both hands and muttered something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was defeated. I sat completely still, staring at the doorway Megan had just walked through. It hit me then that this wasn't really about the fake screenshots or the lies or even the accusations. Those were symptoms. The root was something we'd all ignored for too long. My mom tried to speak first, but her voice cracked. She apologized to me in this small, shaky voice that didn't sound like her. She said she didn't know what to think, that she wanted to believe the best in both of her kids, and that she hadn't expected any of this. She kept glancing at my dad, like she needed him to take over, but he didn't. He just stared at the table, jaw tight, like he was replaying every conversation he'd had with Megan in the last few weeks and seeing them differently now. I told them I didn't know what they expected me to say. My voice sounded weirdly calm, detached. I wasn't angry at them, but I wasn't comforting them either. I was too tired, too drained. Everything felt like it was happening in a soft echo. My dad eventually said he needed some air and stepped outside to the porch. I watched the doors swing shut behind him, then heard the faint creak of the old boards under his weight. My mom asked me if I wanted coffee or something warm, but the way she said it made it clear she was just trying to fill the silence with anything she could. I said no. She nodded too many times. She looked like she didn't know what the right move was anymore. The kitchen smelled stale now, like garlic and something burned underneath. She picked up the wet towels, folded them slowly even though they were damp and useless, and kept biting her lip like she was holding back 1,000 questions she was scared to ask. I went to stand by the window for a minute just to get away from the dining table. I could see my dad sitting on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring out at the street like the answers were hiding in someone's front yard. My parents' neighborhood was quiet, just a couple of cars parked along the curb, a few leaves blowing around in the wind. I could hear a dog barking somewhere down the block. I watched my dad exhale slowly, his breath visible in the cool air. It struck me how small he looked right then, how confused, how old in a way I wasn't used to seeing. I realized he was trying to figure out what part he'd played in all of this without meaning to. When I sat back down at the table, my mom had moved the food into the kitchen, leaving only the empty dishes. She asked me if I hated them. The question hit harder than anything Megan said all day. I told her no, I didn't hate them. I just felt disappointed and tired and sad in a way I didn't even know how to describe. She nodded again, eyes glassy, and said they were going to talk to Megan privately later. Something in her tone told me she didn't know how that conversation would go. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to speculate. I didn't want to soften anything for them. I didn't want to make it harsher either. I felt weirdly disconnected from all of it, like I was watching my own life happen from a few feet back. My dad came back inside eventually, quieter than before. He sat down, folded his hands, and said he needed time to think. He said he wasn't proud of how quickly he believed what she'd told him. He said he wished he'd asked more questions. My mom touched his arm, and for the first time that day they looked like they were on the same page about something. Not in a happy way, but in a heavy, sobering way. My dad apologized to me, not with excuses, but with this bruised honesty that I wasn't prepared for. I didn't say, "I forgive you," because I wasn't sure yet if I did. But I nodded once, and he understood what that meant. Before I left, my mom asked if I wanted to take any leftovers home. It was such a normal question in the middle of such a strange day that I almost laughed. I told her no, not today. She packed some anyway, put them in a plastic bag, and left it on the counter. My dad walked me to the door, not to give a speech or anything, but just to stand there. The late afternoon light made the hallway look dimmer than usual. He said, "We'll figure this out." I said, "I know," even though neither of us knew what figuring it out would even look like. When I stepped outside, the air was cold enough that I could feel it through my hoodie. I heard leaves crackling under my shoes. I could smell someone grilling a few houses away. In the car, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the reflection of the house in my windshield. My parents were still inside, probably talking in low voices, probably replaying everything from the beginning. Megan's car was still parked there, but she wasn't. I wondered where she went, what version of the story she was telling herself now, whether she felt cornered or justified or furious. I didn't know. And for the first time maybe ever, I realized I didn't need to know. That shock hit harder than I expected. All my life I'd tried to understand her, make excuses for her, adjust myself around her chaos. That instinct felt gone. Driving home was quiet. The streets looked the same, but I felt different in this weird, dull way. Not stronger, not victorious, just done. Like some invisible thread tying me to all that drama had finally snapped. By the time I pulled into my apartment lot, the sky was darkening, and the air felt colder. I walked up the stairs slowly, carrying nothing, not even the leftover pasta my mom tried to pack. When I closed my apartment door behind me, the silence inside felt cleaner, like it belonged to me in a way I hadn't appreciated before. I took off my shoes, stood there in the dim light, and let myself breathe normally for the first time all day. That night, after everything, I sat on my couch with the lights off, letting the apartment stay dim except for the glow from the street lamp outside. My phone buzzed a few times, missed calls from my mom, a short text from my dad asking me to let him know when I got home. I typed back that I was fine. I didn't answer my mom yet. I just needed space. I made a frozen pizza, ate 2 slices, and left the rest because my stomach was still knotted from the whole day. Around 9, I finally checked my voicemail. My mom's message was soft and shaky, saying she loved me and that she was sorry. My dad's was shorter, just him saying they were reevaluating a lot of things and that they should have listened better. For once, none of it felt like pressure. It felt like a shift, a real one. I spent the next hour going through my old texts with Megan, scrolling all the way back through years of conversations I'd half forgotten. Every pattern I'd ignored was suddenly obvious. The sudden emergencies, the guilt trips, the dramatic stories that never quite lined up, the moments she'd twist something small into something personal. I realized I'd been carrying the weight of her chaos since we were kids, trying to be the good one, the reasonable one, the one who didn't make trouble. Sitting there on my couch, sock feet pulled up under me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not the loud movie kind. The quiet, steady kind that fills your chest slowly. The kind where you finally admit to yourself you aren't crazy. You weren't imagining it. It really was happening the whole time. Around 10, my dad texted again, saying he and my mom had spoken to Megan after I left. He didn't give details, but he said, things didn't go the way she expected. That was all. But it was enough. My parents weren't brushing it aside. They weren't sweeping it under the rug. They weren't defaulting to keep the peace at my expense like they used to. For the first time in years, maybe the first time ever, I felt like they saw me clearly. Not the quiet kid, not the easy one, not the emotional buffer from Megan's storms. Just me. And that felt like something I didn't know I'd been craving until it finally showed up. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want Megan punished. I just wanted the truth to sit in the room for once without being pushed aside. And it finally had. Before bed, I stepped outside onto my little apartment balcony. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks, and the street was dead quiet except for one guy walking his dog across the lot. I leaned on the railing and looked out at the dull orange glow from the streetlights. I thought about my parents sitting at their dining table earlier, stunned and embarrassed and confused. I thought about how easily they believed Megan's lies, but I also thought about how quickly those lies fell apart when they were actually tested. And I realized something important. I wasn't responsible for fixing her, or protecting them from her, or cleaning up the emotional damage she left behind. That job was never mine, even though I'd been acting like it was. When I finally went back inside, I locked the door behind me and turned off the last lamp. The apartment felt warm and still. Mine. I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful. I just felt free. Free in a way that didn't depend on anyone else apologizing or making things right. Free because I finally stopped carrying something that was never meant for me. My parents would sort out their own relationship with Megan, and I'd finally given myself permission to step back without guilt. That was enough. More than enough. I lay in bed that night, listening to the hum of my heater kicking on, and instead of replaying the awful parts of the day, I fell asleep thinking about how good it felt to breathe again. And that was the thing I gained in all of this. Not money, not revenge, just the space to finally belong to my own life.